Hello, my name is Dr. Kenyon Williams. I'm professor of percussion here at Minnesota State University Moorhead. And today I'd like to talk to you about the Minnesota All-State Snare Drum Etude. Now, this year's etude is a particularly challenging piece written specifically for this year's auditions. And I have to say, it has a great deal of things to talk about. We're going to breeze through quite a few of them quickly, so I really encourage you to watch this video more than once because there's some things you really need to be thinking about as you work on this piece. First and foremost on this piece, make sure before you play anything that your snare drum rolls and your single stroke technique is really sounding and feeling good. In other words, spend time giving yourself nice warm-ups each day. Single stroke, double stroke, and of course, getting good buzz rolls. Now, an important aspect of any all-state snare drum audition is a good quality buzz roll. And especially at the end of this piece, there is a long buzz roll that the judges are going to listen to closely to hear the quality of your roll. One exercise I love to do with my students here at Minnesota State Moorhead to help them work on this is what I call the buzz scale. Imagine we have a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is the longest possible buzz you can do with one hand. That's a 1. A 10 would be an absolute dead stroke. Just completely straight into the head. Then I have my students simply play, for example, a measure of 16th notes at that scale level 10, total dead strokes. Now I say let's loosen that from 10 down to 9, add just a little bit of buzz. To 8, to 7, to 6. So notice my buzzes are getting looser and looser. The idea is we're working on controlling the amount of buzz we have in our hands. So if I go from 10, 9, 8 down to 7, listen to the difference, one measure of each. 9, 8. And you can tell that most buzz rolls for most pieces fall within that 7 to 8 range, depending upon how loud or how fast my hand speed is. So, let's start at the very top. Once I have my hand under control with good buzzes, I have a good fast single stroke technique, okay, which is going to especially enable me by the time I get to measures 32 and 33, then I want to make sure now at this point I'm ready to begin the etude. Now, first off, I want to point out this piece is fast. Before you do anything, make sure that you have a good metronome. You have it ready to go. If you're using your cell phone as a metronome, that's great. One problem I often see in students is they come in with a cell phone metronome, turn it on, they can't hear it. Cell phone metronomes are great on a practice pad, but the minute I'm using a real drum, I probably can't. Most cell phones simply aren't loud enough. So having an actual external metronome or making sure my cell phone is being plugged in with headphones so I can hear it. A metronome you can't hear is simply a useless item. So make sure that you can actually hear your metronome. So to set my pulse here at the beginning, that is moving quick. A good warm-up to get started is simply doing the first 2 bars at that pulse, holding on to the metronome, making sure my pulse is solid. So I'm really focusing on keeping a continuous 16th. Now maybe 2 bars, maybe 4 bars as it were, of just the first 16th note pattern. Making sure that I'm really feeling that flow. Now, obviously, I can't say this enough. To steal a phrase from the great John Wooten, snare drum pedagogue at the University of Southern Mississippi, slow it down so you can break it down, so you can throw it down. First thing, though, you got to slow it down. Don't try to practice this etude at chord equals 140. Don't even try to learn it at chord note equals 110. Bring it down where you're comfortable. Maybe start at chord note equals 60, 70, or in this case, chord note equals 80, so I can really control my dynamics and my strokes. There. Now I've got a good sense for that. And the nice thing, too, about doing it at a slow tempo, I can put my metronome on an 8th note click, which allows me to play through these 3/8 bars much more confidently at a slower speed. So with that click there, I'm assured of being much more solid in my initial pulses and in my initial rhythms. So use that metronome. Now, I want to point out that one of the things that many students learn to do incorrectly when they work on their all-state etudes is they simply learn the rhythms. Maybe they learn the techniques well as well, but they forget a very important aspect, and that is musicality. For example, if I play the first 4 bars just as written at tempo, That's nice, but it's kind of robotic. I should add a sense of phrase, a sense of flow. Students ask me, Dr. Williams, how do I know on a snare drum piece where the phrase is? I tell them it's rather simple. Simply sing it to yourself. Where do you normally take a breath? That spot where you take a breath is most likely the spot where a phrase should begin or end. And a good idea for phrases is always what we call the hairpin shape, where I crescendo to the middle, decrescendo out. Now some phrases crescendo to the end, others may decrescendo to the end, but a generic idea is crescendo to the middle, crescendo, and decrescendo out. So if I think of those first 4 bars as one 4-bar phrase, then I get something that sounds like this. You can hear there, I did a 4-bar shape. The last 2 bars, I did a little crescendo coming out. A little too short for me to do a little 2-bar phrase. And obviously, notice measures 7 and 8. Those are definitely a completely new phrase based upon the dynamic. Now, another option could be to do the whole first line as one phrase. That'd be an unusual 6-bar shape. In that case, if I wanted to do it, I could do that as one of 2 ways. I could crescendo to the middle, or I could maybe crescendo all the way through, so then I really land right where I'm about to land at measure 7, then I suddenly pull the rug out on myself, as it were, musically, and drop down to piano for the next line. So let's try that. I'm going to do it both ways. First, I'm going to do it as a large shape, where I'm going to get louder to the middle, softer at the end. Then I'm going to go crescendo all the way to the end. You decide what you like best. So here we go. Or the other one, I'm just going to do a crescendo all the way through to make it one long phrase. Now, notice I didn't make it a really overt crescendo. The judges at the end of the day are judging how well you are following the ink on the page, but they're also listening for musicality. So, to give yourself that extra edge, try not to play it just straight robotic. That'll sound great technically, but it simply won't be very musical. Instead, think about how I can shape and phrase throughout the entire piece. Now, I can do that for the entire composition, especially where I have lines where there are simply no dynamic contrast. Now, much of the phrasing in this piece is already written in, simply by the virtue of the dynamics. Following the dynamics will give you the phrases and shapes you pretty much need throughout most of this piece. However, that first line is a great spot to insert a phrase, as is a little later on in the piece, we have some measures that are obviously shorter, maybe 1 or 2 bar phrase measures. For example, measure 31, where I could play it as written at a piano level. Or I can add a little phrase shape to it. Now I'm making some music with it. That little up and down curve makes it so much more attractive and so much more fun to listen to. Now, rather than play through this entire etude and demonstrate how it goes, I want to simply play through some chunks and point out some things that are real tricks for the piece. Now that we've talked about musicality, I want to mention, of course, the dynamics. The biggest trap in this piece is the extreme dynamics. So, when I finish that last measure, for example, the first line, I have an immediate jump down to piano in the next line. So, making that jump for that piano roll with that forte accent, and then immediately jumping up to that fortissimo in the very next bit. And then I heard right there, jumping from fortissimo to mezzo forte to fortissimo. One thing I like to use my students is what I call the rule of 3s, and that is a pianissimo is about 1 inch off the drum stick height. Piano about 3 inches. Mezzo forte about 6 inches. Forte 9. Fortissimo 12. So roughly 3 inches every dynamic, except pianissimo, of course, being the 1 inch at the very beginning. So using that as a good guidepost, not a rule, but a guidepost, that then helps me keep track as I'm playing the etude, especially if I'm recording myself practicing, using video off your cell phone like I am right now. Then you can see, am I actually following, as well as am I listening? Am I playing the dynamics as written? Am I also letting my sticks reflect the dynamic as I play? Now, that said, I really would discourage you from making jumps to the edge of this drum. Many students may have been taught to play piano, for example, near the edge, and then forte or fortissimo more towards the middle. The problem is that creates a very different tonal color than a fortissimo sound, or than the center of the drum. And especially if I'm jumping from here, that sounds like literally I have 2 separate drums. Musically, that's a little bit unusual. I'd encourage you rather to stay mostly in one spot, especially to be in an etude like this where you are constantly jumping back and forth. The piece is going to sound Well, honestly, if you jump back and forth, you're going to sound a little like good twin, evil twin. So we want to try to say a little bit more with one tonal color. And I'm going to encourage you to stay mostly in one area on the drum as you play. Now, another trick to be aware of in this piece is some of the flams. For example, when I get to measure 17 at the 3/8, it's easy to play flat flams if I'm not careful, like this. Okay, we want to make sure I can hear those flams wide open. So if I slow it down, I need to hear each flam clearly at tempo. So be very careful to have that flam. Keep the flam itself low. Keep the downstroke, that's the accent behind it, nice and firm. Now, the piece really has another problem when you get to measure number 29. At 29, if you've been using a metronome up through this point, the metronome works pretty well, but when we get to measure 29, suddenly we shift into 9/8. Now at this point, you need to recalculate. Now if you do the math, if I started the piece, quarter note equals 144, then by the time I get to measure 29, the eighth note, remember 144 times 2 is 288, divide that by 3, then my dotted quarter now is 96. So at measure 29, I want to reset my metronome to shoot for a tempo goal of 96. So I'm thinking this. So that means 98, again, pretty fast. And notice I'm practicing that dynamic from forte down to piano. And that little lick right there is a huge trick. So I would slow it down, put my metronome on a triplet click, and get very comfortable simply doing what we have at the downbeat of 29. Getting that loop loud, soft. It happens over and over in this little excerpt. The next strongest challenge in this piece is measure number 32, where we have that same figure, over and over and over again. So, taking that slowly, getting that metronome, getting really comfortable playing that rhythm all the way through. Now, counting the rhythms at this point are truly a challenge. I have a counting system I use, which is the triplets as 1 la li, 2 la li. So for example, at measure 29, 1 ta la ta lita, 29 becomes 1 ta la la li lita. 1 ta la la li lita. Wow, the counting system really breaks down when you get to rhythms like this, advanced rhythms like this on snare drum. So a good way to think of it simply might be in groups of 3. 1, 2, 3. In this case, the 9/8 is 3 groups of 3. 1, 2, so I say triplets. 1 and 2 la li 3 and 1, 2. 1, 2. 1 and 2 la li 3 and 1. 3, 1, 3. So again, measure 29. Here's my triplet. 1 la li here, or sorry, 1, 2, 3, where I go. 1 and 2 la li 3 and 1, 2. 1, 2. 1 and 2 la li 3 and 1. 3, 1, 3. Now at that tempo then, I'm going to practice that with good control, up and down dynamics and nice open flams. Notice I was doing that quite a bit under tempo. At speed, it's quite a bit faster. So practicing again, slow it down so you can break it down, so that then you can throw it down, to borrow again from the great John Wooten. Now, another trick lick in this piece is when you jump over to measure 35, you have a jump, dynamic extreme jump, from a forte to a piano to a forte with rolls thrown in. So again, if I were going to count this in 3, I would look at this, and here's where we have an interesting issue. I have 1 la li, if I think a triplet, 1 la li 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3, 1 la li 2. Notice I'm playing all my rolls in what we call a 16th note bass. So for example, if I have that measure, if I take away the rolls and play what I call just the skeleton, measure 37 comes off like this. I'm going to play it with no dynamics for a moment, just so you can really hear the skeleton. I'll do that again. 1, here I go. Now if I add the buzz to it, now I'm going to add the dynamic to it. There's my 3 steps. Slow it down, break it down. Now I'm going to start to throw it down. Add tempo in the metronome, get faster until finally it's at this speed. And I'm feeling comfortable playing all the way through. Now, the last thing, since we're running out of time, this is obviously a lot of information to process as you work on a piece like this. I want to point out that very last line has an interesting problem in it that you need to interpret a little bit for yourself. The third to last measure has a crescendo, a long roll crescendo, that then crescendos to, we don't know. For some reason, the composer didn't give us an indication. Are we supposed to crescendo from piano to forte, piano to fortissimo? Do we do just a slight piano crescendo? But we definitely have a feeling written by the composer for that subito piano. Subito means suddenly. So that second to last bar, I should crescendo into it and then immediately drop to piano. Now, my natural inclination as a musician would be to say, well, if I'm going to crescendo, I want to probably crescendo to about what the last dynamic was. So if I look at measure 42, the last dynamic was fortissimo. So I'm going to, mentally, what I've done, and actually with my handy pencil, which you should always have when you practice along with your metronome, I'm going to write a fortissimo there in the third to last bar. So I'm going to crescendo from piano to fortissimo and then immediately drop down to my subito piano. Again, I'm also going to hold on to that 16th note skeleton. Now, slow it down, break it down. So now I'm going to play, starting at measure 42 with the dynamics, but I'm going to play just the skeleton. Again, no buzz roll, so I can work on my dynamics, especially as I'm beginning that roll crescendo. So here's 42. Okay, right there I have that crescendo coming out. Now I'm going to add the buzz so it comes all together like this. Again, nice and slow. Now, that is an interesting trick, that crescendo coming out of it. Finally, if I added it tempo, that right now, notice the buzz roll doesn't sound so great at this tempo. That's okay. I'm not planning on performing at that tempo. But when I am playing at the actual speed of chord equals 144, go back to measure 42. Whoa, that sounds pretty good. And finally, notice that last little four-stroke rough. Typically, a traditional way to play that, don't try to play it as single stroke. You're not going to be able to play it fast enough. A nice, easy way to play that is a right, left, right sticking. Right, left, right. So literally, take it slow, add it faster until it becomes. Then the last two bars. The trick is not to do this. Don't insert a rest. Go immediately into that rough. It's tough, but I know you can do it. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope that if you have a chance, be sure and check out my mallet etude video to help you with this year's Minnesota All-State auditions. Thanks for listening.